Good evening and welcome to the Office of African American Affairs Women's Empowerment Summit. Tonight, we are focusing on Black mothers talking with leaders in our law enforcement. We know that police and the use of police in our communities is a strong subject for many of us. And we're very excited to be able to have leaders from our law enforcement and leaders in our community sit together and talk about this issue that is so important to us. So I want to thank each of you for joining us today. I know that you all will personally introduce yourselves and just thank you all in the community for joining us for this very important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to tonight's event, Black Mothers Talking with Leaders in Law Enforcement. We are happy you are here, and as we openly discuss important topics around law enforcement and the Black community on tonight. We have some very special guests here on tonight, and we're going to have them introduce themselves. I will say their name, and then behind that, they will give a brief discussion on who you are and what you represent here in the state of New Mexico. Okay, so here to my far left, we have Chief John Ortolano.
Thank you. I've been the chief of police since September of 2019 in Hobbs. Prior to coming to New Mexico, I served for a little over 21 years with the Arizona Department of Public Safety, where I retired as a captain. I had many assignments as a captain, the last being the commander of the State Gang Task Force in the Phoenix metropolitan area.
Thank you. Next to the chief is Secretary Jason Bowie.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. Again, Jason Bowie. I'm with the Department of Public Safety, Cabinet Secretary there. I come from the Rio Rancho Police Department. I just retired there 4 months ago. I served that community for 27 years, starting in 1994 as a patrolman. Various assignments throughout my career, retired as a Deputy Chief over Operations.
Thank you. And to my very right, we have one of the Black mothers that will represent the community, and her name is Stacy Burleson.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Yes, my name is Stacy Burleson. I am the Executive Director of a program called Women in Leadership, which is for any woman impacted by the criminal justice system, directly or indirectly. I am a returning citizen. I did do some time in the Department of Corrections back in 2010. I'm also a mother and a grandmother who is out here, just trying to raise kids and, just keep them out of trouble and keep them out of the street. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we want to encourage you to post in the chat on today. We welcome you to add to the conversation by posting questions in the chat box. Please check your chat box, and next to it, make sure that you have all panelists and attendees selected. And from that, we will include you in this conversation. Thank you. So we want to start off, and I guess as I mentioned the questions that we're going to start the conversation, I think if you just raise the mic to your mouth, that we know that you're going to respond, okay? So the first question is, Governor Lujan Grisham has announced that she will ask for $100 million to add 1,000 officers statewide. Can you all say how you see this impacting communities?
Yes, ma'am. I think it'd be most appropriate for me to answer that question, as I'm intimately involved with the budget process and that request. So, we're hoping that, of course, that it has a positive effect. I believe everybody feels the same, and that the crime rate is through the roof, and everybody would like to see an immediate reduction, particularly in violent crime. And so we're hoping really to accomplish that with our budget proposal and adding additional police officers on the street. We're really hoping that this has a positive impact on the crime rate. I don't know how you guys feel. Personally, I have seen a tremendous change. I've lived in this community, like I said, for 27 years. And when I look at what it is today compared to where we've come from, I believe it to be unacceptable. So, the funding, I really appreciate it. There are a lot of states that quite honestly are defunding the police. And while we are funding the police, that satisfied me in a lot of ways. I understand that adding police officers, there's a huge responsibility to make sure that we effectively train those police officers to the level that we expect them to perform their duties. And so I think it's going to be very positive for our communities.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to respond?
In Southeast New Mexico, there's two narratives that are coming down reference that I'm hearing that one of it is that the 1,000 officers would only be for the state police. And the other narrative is that it could possibly be spread throughout the state with the counties and the cities. Could you clarify on the 1,000 officers?
Absolutely. We recognize that it's a statewide need. And so it's not just for the New Mexico State Police. We were hoping to have an impact throughout the entire state. And so the support is statewide law enforcement. We hope to be successful there. Now, it's a big undertaking, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you just don't just add 1,000 police officers overnight. We still have to recruit these people. We still have to train them. And so it's going to be a project longer than just through this fiscal year or the next budget year. We can expect that this will take several years and several budget cycles to be successful and making sure that we have the police force that we need.
I would like to add to that.
Yes.
For myself, I would think in a way it's good because I do want to feel safe. I don't feel safe. But then at the same time, I'm kind of scared of the police, right? And so my fear of the police has come from my life of committing crime. And at the same time, I have made my children scared of the police. And then what we see in the media has made it even worse. So as you guys are adding these officers and you say you're adding training, is it new training or is it the same old training? Who's doing the training? What does the training consist of? Because we know that, some of the things haven't worked. And so we know a lot of people that do these trainings for you guys haven't actually, been in the hood or been in the streets or, even lived in poverty. And they're the ones that are doing these trainings for, the police department or to social workers. So, that's a problem. So have you guys looked at the trainings that you're actually doing, or are you guys using the same ones? That's what I would ask.
I'm sure the chief will have some opinions as well, and I'll let him weigh in here just a minute. You can change curriculum all day long, right? At the state level, we can mandate certain curriculum to be taught. At the end of the day, it really goes down to the culture of each individual police department, right? I mean, there's a lot of different police departments throughout the state of New Mexico and on a national level. And so if you don't change a culture within the agency itself, if you don't have the right leadership in place to make sure that the culture changes, it really doesn't much matter, in my opinion, what the curriculum says. Because if you have a police officer that is teaching it improperly, well, that's going to, trickle down through your organization. It depends on what that agency allows. So if you believe in constitutional policing as a police agency and you have the right leadership in place and you create a culture within that specific organization for the things that you expect, I think you can have positive results all the way down to the line level officer. If you as a law enforcement leader tolerate certain shortcomings of our police officers, that's in my mind where the problem starts. And so really, not so much even the focus for me on the curriculum side. For me, it's on the accountability side, starting at the leadership at the very top. Again, my history was with the Rio Rancho Police Department, and we really prided ourselves in not tolerating a whole lot from our officers. In the community as well. I mean, we policed very firmly but fairly, but we expected quality from our police officers. And when they come up short, we would hold them accountable to that degree. And so I think it really starts with the leadership. And every agency is different, right? I mean, you could have a complete different response, even in the state of New Mexico, from one agency to another. And so, again, just kind of summing up your concern, it starts for me at the very top of the organization. And if your chief of police or your sheriff is not demanding the best out of your people, I think that's really where the problem starts. And so curriculum is important, don't get me wrong. But you can teach curriculum all day long. And if the message really doesn't carry within the organization itself and you don't believe in it as an organization, you're not fixing it with a state-driven curriculum. That's just my opinion. Chief.
Just a moment, Chief, before you respond to that, I wanted to kind of give you a little bit more so you can go beyond what the secretary just spoke on. So what she was saying is, I'm not sure that she was focusing on curriculum as much as she was on training. And I did hear you say that many of them did not grow up in the type of atmospheres that they have to police. And so there is curriculum that says you must handle this situation. But do we have an opportunity here to diversify law enforcement in New Mexico? So not just curriculum, but sensitivity training, diversity, know your neighborhood. Okay.
One of the things that I take a different approach to what a lot of people do. A lot of people want to throw money at a problem and hope that adding additional police officers will be the panacea that's going to cure all. I'm a proponent of taking measures to retain people in policing that are already in policing and transition policing back to a career. I think over both of our careers, we've seen a lot of people entering law enforcement that are not looking at it as a career. They're kind of taking it as a job. And we have a lot of turnover in law enforcement. I believe much higher with people, say 5 years and under, that are coming and going out of the profession. And it makes it very difficult for police leaders to truly get these young officers trained, because it typically takes 3 to 5 years for someone to be a very proficient officer. Just because you come out of the academy and you finish field training, although that officer may think that they know everything, you never learn everything in law enforcement. I've been doing this over 23 years. I learn something new every day, it seems. I'm sure Secretary learns something new every day in this profession. And to me, I would like to see some of the focus of the money being to retain current officers. One of the unique things, like the state of Louisiana does something where the state actually provides money to every single law enforcement officer, because in the recruiting in law enforcement is I don't want to call it cutthroat, but it is so difficult to attract quality applicants in law enforcement right now. We get some quality applicants, but the percentage that I would consider like the cream of the crop that want to come into law enforcement, I don't think that we're getting the percentages that we would like to. I know when I became a police officer in Arizona, there was over, I believe, 1,200 people applying for a few positions. Now, anecdotally, I could say a lot of agencies around the state will have more openings than applicants than what they'll get. And to me, so that's why I would think that some of the focus of that money would be to retain current officers, reward additional training, reward them for their tenure, because just the training academies alone, trying to get an additional 1,000 officers trained would be that's going to be a heavy lift to get that many new officers trained, adequately trained and adequately supervised. Because unfortunately in law enforcement now, what we have, because of a lot of retirements, because a lot of states around the country increased the requirements from a lot of places at 20 years, went to 25 years, very similar to what New Mexico did. Arizona did the same. So you have a lot of retirements and a lot of people coming and going. So I know I've seen a lot of junior officers being supervised by junior sergeants and junior lieutenants. So we have a lot of junior personnel out there. And I would like to see some of the focus be on what can we do to retain, but more importantly, attract the best of the best to come into law enforcement.
Thank you. So I wanted to come back to you, and then we'll go back around round table. So as we heard the chief speak about retention and better salaries, the next question is, how can law enforcement build better relationships with the communities? So of course, in the time that we're living in, we know that in New Mexico, the salary may not be competitive. But I also think that there is something else that's having the officers leave and we're not able to retain. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm really not too sure. For one, like you said, we don't have that many officers as it is, so it's a dangerous profession already, when they're having to work, short staff and somewhat not feeling respected. So I'm not too sure, but I think that one thing that we might could do is to start healing the community is start, having some community events, maybe with the police officers that's police in the neighborhoods, and mainly particularly, if we want to talk about the Black neighborhood. And so I think that, if we start sitting down with some of these officers in these neighborhoods, we could see what we could do, to keep them, to keep them to stay in the neighborhoods and to make us feel safer. But the one issue that we do have is that we don't have anywhere for, the Black kids to go. Like right now, we have an issue at La Cueva High School where there was an issue with a young lady where, somebody threatened her with a gun, and then there was a swastika sign and nothing happened, right? And so once again, the Black community, we're not going to trust the police, and we're not going to trust the schools. These kids are not going to school. They're afraid now, right? And so they have nowhere to go. And I think that that's one problem, is that we would never be able to, get along with the police officers, because we don't have anywhere to sit down and even talk with y'all, talk about the problems that's going on in the neighborhood. So I think maybe we could start there. We need to start having more conversations like this. And when you talk about money, is she just putting the money towards hiring officers and training officers? Is she putting some of that money towards like mental health, to try to put mental health in the community? Is that money being invested in the community at all? Is she doing anything like that? Because I would think that you would need to do that, because like you said, you can hire all the officers that you want. And if you don't get them trained right, but if you don't get the community to trust, you're still going to have a problem and an issue. And so, and part of the reason that the community don't trust a police officer is it is a mental health issue because of what we see. So I would think that we need to start having more conversations like this. And until we do, I think that you guys will continue to lose officers, and we will continue not have trust in you guys.
Thank you. We're going to come back to Secretary. As you were speaking, coming from a large African-American community, I remember as a young child going to the police days, and where they would have free events. And even as a single mother at that time in Detroit, I looked forward to taking my children places that I didn't have to pay for. And they had police days where we would go to the police station and walk around, and they would talk to the children, and they came into the neighborhood, and they would bring hot dogs and those kind of things. They stayed in the community. So I do agree, but then we're in a time where officers, again, we don't have enough. And the fear is not just in the community, but then the officers have to watch their backs also. Respond.
Yes, a lot's been said, so I'll try to touch on a few things. Budget-wise, this $100 million we're talking about are specifically for law enforcement programs. That's not to say there's not other programs out there for mental illness and all those things. So definitely on the priority for the governor to address those issues. But if you're talking specifically about the $100 million that was announced, those are for law enforcement programs, and not just for police officers in uniform. Some of the things that we're looking to do is to, we've saddled our police officers with responsibilities for which the profession was really never intended. Now, police officers have always, risen to the occasion, but the reality is there's a lot of things that we put on our commissioned officers that professional civilian staff, non-commissioned people could be doing. And I'll just provide just a brief few examples, but we have officers in uniform shuttling evidence across the state to crime labs. These are people, they don't need to be commissioned to do that. We can have civilian or professional staff, crime scene investigators, evidence technicians, our laboratories, same thing. We have 3 labs in the state. We have one in Hobbs, Las Cruces, and Santa Fe. We are not doing enough to invest into the scientists. And so you can have people out there that are potentially reoffending, repeat offenders, and they could potentially having multiple pieces of evidence from different crime scenes throughout the community sitting at the lab. But if we can't process the evidence that's there, ultimately we're not fixing the crime problem. So when we start talking about this $100 million specifically, those are for law enforcement initiatives. You're concerned about other things for the community. Those are not forgotten about. Those are being addressed through budgetary processes as well. I want to go just touch on just for a minute, if I may, on the trust issue. I got to tell you, it really disappoints me, but I know that it's real. I know that it's real that people don't trust the police, and I can tell you, having worked in the community so hard year after year to build community trust, nothing frustrates a police officer more that does his job every day, and nothing frustrates a police administrator more than seeing something on the news or having somebody come up short and then having all of that hard work erode overnight, right? And I can tell you that that's not just for police administration. If you were a police officer and you were working calls for service and call for service, and you were working so hard to build trust from call to call to call, it doesn't even have to happen in your own state, right? I mean, we see it happens in another state, and they say, people are immediately distrusting of the police in every community. It's very frustrating. And all I can really say there on the trust side is we got to keep trying. We got to keep working at it. We got to keep having these conversations like we're having today, because it pains me to hear somebody say that they don't trust the police, because the reality is that, you know, we spent a lifetime trying to build that. And you mentioned your children a little bit ago, how, you know, even that message carries on to them. And I've had those personal experiences. I remember being at a bus stop one time and befriending a gentleman. He came over from California, and his son, same age as mine, was always very apprehensive to talk to me. And I would be at the bus stop in uniform. And it was after several months later to where he's like, you know, he told his son, this one's all right. You can trust him if you ever need something. And although I was pleased to hear that it was a small victory, you know, with him personally, the fact that he was teaching his son that I was one of the few that he could trust, it bothered me. Now I didn't say that to him, because ultimately I was just glad to have the trust just to start with. But, you know, I didn't want to skip over the conversation with addressing the trust piece. It's so important to us. And I don't think you realize how many officers really feel the same way. There are so many untold stories of police officers working so hard out there. And those are not the narratives that get the same attention, right? I mean, it's really just the highlights of when an officer performs poorly. And it's just disappointing to us within the law enforcement community as it is for you. Please.
Well, like, why would you, how could you, I would say, why would you be disappointed in something like that when it's a fear that's been built up inside of me because of something I was doing, right? And it's just carried on. But it's a fear that's been built up in a lot of people just because of the media, just because of or maybe because of their own experience, right? That's like, you know, when I have to look at somebody that's struggling with drugs, I used to be, you know, mad at them or whatever. I can no longer be mad at them because I know they're struggling, right? And they have to have healing. So we have to be able to heal from this, right? So what can we do to get people to trust y'all? Like what to, you know, to trust you guys, you know, it's something that, you know, we can't help. Like if I'm not committing any crime, but if the police pull next to me, my heart start beating, I'm nervous, right? But if I need to call y'all, I'm going to call y'all. And if y'all come, I'll open the door. I'm not scared then. So do you get what I'm saying? Yes. So it's kind of like, it's a mental health thing that we have built up inside of us, you know what I mean? And so it's deeper than, I know we have to have more police officers and we have to get you guys trained, but it's deeper than that, right? So it's off in the community and is rooted. And we got to do something about that.
I don't want to hog the conversation. I want to give the chief a chance to jump in. When I say I'm disappointed, please understand that I'm not disappointing you as an individual. I mean, just overall, like what we hope for and what reality is sometimes are far apart, right? I'm disappointed because I know that law enforcement doesn't want this. Law enforcement wants to be trusted. And so when I say disappointed, I'm not disappointed in the Black community. I'm not disappointed in you as an individual. I just know that what's in our hearts, and I say the majority of police officers and what they try to do every day, when we hear that, it hurts a little bit because, you know, ultimately they're trying hard to win that trust. So, you know, can we do things better? Do we come up short at times? Absolutely. And I think so often as law enforcement leaders, we don't acknowledge when we come up short, right? I mean, we're not perfect people by any stretch of the imagination. And when we come up short, I think we should address those issues head on and have those difficult conversations like what you're talking about.
Chief, if you'd like to address.
Yes, there's two things that I learned when I worked at the police academy in Phoenix area, and I became a Blue Courage instructor. And one of the terms that I learned is called the Immortal Cop. Not an immortal cop that you're bulletproof and you're going to live forever, but I share with all officers that I train that you're immortal to every single person that you interact with doing the performance of your duties, because everybody knows, every single police officer, how they were treated throughout their life. You remember if you were treated with dignity and respect, if they treated you like garbage, or were they just you felt they were just doing their job and they really didn't want to go the extra mile. You remember how that police officer treated you. And I tell every police officer that you're immortal to every single person that you deal with, whether you believe it or not. And I'll tell the police officer, you remember the first traffic ticket you got. Remember if you had a call for service. And I go, and you're a police officer. I said, so every citizen that you have contact with will remember you. And if you treat these people incorrectly, the next police officer that goes to interact with this person they already have an uphill battle because someone in the community may say, oh, here comes another police officer from whatever agency. And if you've dealt with 2 or 3 police officers that didn't treat you with dignity and respect, didn't listen to you, by the time the 3rd officer comes to deal with you, you're thinking that officer is going to be just like the other 2. And so I share with our officers that they need to build what's called an emotional bank account with the community. It doesn't take very long to start making little deposits in these emotional bank accounts. When you're done with the call for service and there's some kids around, talk to the kids, ask them how school is going. One of the first things I did as chief in Hobbs is I told all my police officers, I said, find someone in the community every day that doesn't look like you and go talk to them. And they're like, Chief has lost his mind. And I didn't tell them why I wanted them to do it. I said, go into businesses that you've never been into. I said, and then afterwards I was telling them, you're building an emotional bank account with someone you probably wouldn't have went and talked to. And I said, you don't know how impactful that could be, that if you had, say, 3 officers over the course of the month that you would have never had any contact with, started talking to you or people in your neighborhood, there's going to be some chatter. The chatter hopefully is going to be good, saying the cops are in the neighborhood. And I did this when I was on the job maybe a month in Hobbs, and I took the deputy chief and we went over to one of our more economically depressed areas, and I was walking around talking to people. And the last person I was talking to, he was an African-American young adult. He was probably 22 years old. And I'm talking to him for a few minutes. And after a few minutes, he puts his hand, he goes, wait a minute. He goes, who are you again? And I said, I'm a chief of police. And he says, 2 things about you impressed me. And I'm like, well, what? And he goes, first off, he goes, that you're out here talking to us. He goes, but more importantly, he goes, your approach. He says, when you came up to me and were talking to me, he goes, you didn't come up to me saying, what are you doing? You came up to me saying, how are you doing? And he said, that wasn't taking place around here. And I impart that to all the police officers at the agency, going, you don't know how impactful one conversation can be to erase the negatives that may have been built up, making withdrawals from those emotional bank accounts that they should have been building up. So that's what I do. And that's what hopefully my officers are doing, even when I'm not around, because if it's important enough for me to do it, I've expressed to them it's important enough that they should be doing it as well.
Very good. So I have another question here, and I have something I want to encourage you to continue to post in the chat. We want to involve you in the conversation. We have a question here. What is being done to recruit African-American police officers in APD, state police, Bernalillo, Hobbs? What is being done? Because part of the mistrust is because these children don't see anybody that looks like them in law enforcement. Can you tell us what's being done?
I'm fortunate enough that in Hobbs, the ethnic diversity of the Hobbs Police Department almost mirrors that of the community. Looking at our census numbers, we're a little bit off. We have a slightly higher number of whites and a slightly lower number of Hispanics, but it's within, like, I believe it's 7 or 8 percentage points difference. And when you're looking at police departments, we're doing really good. Our percentage of African Americans working at the police department is a little bit higher than where our community is at. One of the things I do is I talk to people in our community. I talk to clergy. I talk to our NAACP president, Joe Cotton, and I tell these people, I said, everybody has somebody in their community that they think would be a good police officer. Send their application to me, because if it's very powerful that I can go up to someone in the community going, hey, would you love to be a police officer? It'd be far more impactful if people that they deal with on a daily basis and respect say, I want you to be a police officer in our community. And I think that would help our recruitment in areas of the country or areas of the state where we're lacking. If the community would just talk amongst themselves, or at their church or any community event, go, who in our community would be a good police officer? Because you know your brothers and sisters and neighbors better than a lot of our police officers do, and encourage them to become a police officer. And especially if you could get, a group of them together, so they're a group of friends or a group of good people who, and they know other people. They don't feel that they're strangers. That would be a great help. I know what we're doing, and it's been working in Hobbs, like I said, because we are a very ethnically diverse police department. Historically across the country, though, we're lacking with female applicants. I believe nationwide, the number of police officers that are females is around 12%, which is horrible. That's nationwide. And at the Hobbs Police Department, I believe we're at 13%. Nothing to scream good about. I would love to see those numbers climb, but I understand why the numbers are where they're at. But we had a women's recruiting event to get people interested in becoming a police officer, being a detention officer, code enforcement, all the positions at the police department. You know, we had females there to say, hey, you know, I'm doing the job, you know, ask me questions. But it's a lot of work. And you don't get, still, even with these targeted type events, you still don't get a lot of results.
Do you want to address that, or?
You know, the only thing I would add to that, I agree with what he's saying. In the New Mexico State Police, which is I currently represent, same thing. I mean, if we look at the makeup of the New Mexico State Police, really it represents the populace that we have in New Mexico. But quite honestly, I'm not really about wanting to push this number today, because I don't know that that's really going to satisfy those people that want to see African Americans in law enforcement. I think one of the challenges that we quite honestly have is really goes back to the trust issue. We collectively, through these conversations, need to paint a different picture and encourage our African Americans to want to join law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And until we reduce the fear of what law enforcement is about within the community, people are not going to want to join that, right? And so again, through these conversations, if your interest specifically is to have our male or female African Americans join the police force, we have to reduce the fear as a whole. And I think we need to continue these conversations and have those kind of events where we can have direct conversation with them and make them understand. And I don't want to say it's our side, because I don't really want to create that divide, but let them understand what law enforcement is about and make a positive example of what it can be.
Thank you. I'm seeing many questions come over in the chat. I'm so glad that you are engaged. Keep it coming. There's a question here. What is the police force doing? And I'm going to first kind of turn the question a little bit for you to respond, and then you come back and speak to her. So what is the police force doing to assure our young Black children or adults are safe when they are pulled over or when they have interactions with the young people? This question says, my daughter was very frightened when she got pulled over by a police officer. She called me and wanted me to stay on the phone with her because she was scared. What assurance are the officers portraying to our young Black people? So as a community leader, I think you can kind of address that question, or kind of even explain the question even more, and then we'll have you respond.
I would think, I'm not too sure, most kids, when they're getting pulled over, they're just automatically scared. That's just going to be the automatic response, and they're going to call their parents. So, when they walk up to the car, they think they might get shot. So I'm not too sure, if you guys are, walking up two at a time, if one officer comes, then, we may feel okay. Once you call that second officer, then we're like, oh, wait a minute. And so it seems to be automatically, like when there's someone Black that's pulled over, there's automatic backup called, and so that's a double fear that's put on top of us already, right? We automatically think we're going to, go to jail. We don't know if the police is going to plan something on us. That's just the overall fear. And I don't think anything is happening, and I'm not saying that that's the officer's intention. That's just the way things have been set out. So I don't think that there has been anything to ensure the community that nothing's going to happen to their child, or to make the community feel better that nothing is going to happen to their child. And so I would say, I don't know of anything that is happening right now, but one thing that I can say is that it can start today. You know what I mean? It can start right now. So what can we do now? So it doesn't matter what has happened in the past. We got a lot of people watching. What can you guys do to ensure or to make things better? I'm not trying to take over or ask the questions,
So she threw it back at you. Go right ahead.
but I don't know of anything honestly to say, you know, but what can you guys do?
I resort to the previous discussion we had with our emotional bank account and the Immortal Cop. And the secretary and I, before we went on, we were talking that we wish that the youth would have more interactions with police officers, and we don't want their first interaction to be on a traffic stop. So if they've had growing up positive interactions with police officers, a traffic stop is just, well, I did something wrong, or I didn't know what I did and the cop's stopping me. But the half dozen cops I've dealt with in my life, you know, hopefully young kids have had, you know, a few positive interactions. They'll think, hey, it's no big deal because every time I meet the cops. So if we do our job, hopefully building the emotional bank account and having a bank account, excuse me, and having the Immortal Cop be a positive interaction with the youth, especially, that will hopefully minimize any fears for any child being pulled over. Because I know, I think the first time I got pulled over, I was a teenager, and I wasn't scared. I just didn't know what I did. But that was just my personal experience.
Right. Well, I know one thing. I'm sorry. Can I add to this? I know one thing that we can do in New Mexico and Albuquerque, New Mexico. One thing we can do is we can start, we need to find a place for these kids to go, whether Black kids, because we have nowhere for our youth to go, but we have money, right? And so we need that money. That there was money that was assigned to the Black community. There was $1 million. We don't know where it's at. There's 700,000 somewhere. We need that money invested in our community. We can provide our community our own mental health to start that healing process with the police department. We have an actual New Mexico Black Mental Health Coalition where we can start the healing, because that's where it has to start, you know, with the anxiety when getting pulled over. We need to start talking to our kids how to interact with the police, you know, how to be respectful to just authority, period, right? You know, you want to come home, right? And so we need to start having those conversations with our kids, and we just don't have no place to do that, but we have the money for it. And so we would, as a Black community, we would like for that money to be released to the Black community so we can start that healing process with the police department. So, I mean, if anybody knows where it is, Charles, Ashley, whoever, that could be a start. If you guys could reach out to him, and maybe we could start having more meetings and getting some youth here at the table and see how they feel.
Very good. And that kind of addresses a couple of things there. So first, the announcement was that we're asking for $100 million for 1,000 officers. Whereas we agreed that we don't want to defund the police officers at all. We agree with that, but we don't agree with all of the money that is being asked for more police officers, because a lot of police officers without the proper training could be a negative instead of a positive. I want to address when you spoke about when you got pulled over the first time. And I can imagine our audience saying, it's just not the same, Chief. It's not the same. Growing up again in the riot time, I'm a little older, and growing up in that riot time and the police officers riding down the street and telling us to get on the porch, there was a different kind of fear toward the police. It was more of a reverence toward the position that they held. It wasn't a fear of they're going to shoot me. It was more of a reverence. And so at that time, even if I got pulled over, there may have been a little hostility in the answering, but no disrespect toward the officer, because we respected that position. But in the time that we're living in with social media and, you know, again, with the narrative only being on the negative part of what police officers represent, when you say an emotional bank, again, we're asking people to emotionally represent in a community that says we don't want you there. Okay, so they may get that one or two, but as you're saying that we need somewhere for the children to go, there's so many more pieces before we can get a child to go anywhere. We have to bring the two together to talk. Because even if the children go somewhere, the representation of law enforcement will be a negative, because this is what they see every day. They see the negativity. So with all of that being said, $100 million for more officers, emotional bank. What can we do? The question was, I'm sorry, I have so many questions, but the question was, so then how or what is being done in this state to bring the officers to the community, not just in sensitivity training, but actually bring them in. Come on, let's go back to the community. Let's go back to the churches. Let's go back to where the African American community is, instead of standing out here saying we're getting trained, but let's go back to where they are.
I was just going to say briefly, to your point, one of the things that I've stressed to the officers, especially patrol officers that are most visible, is I urge them, they have to be in the communities. A lot of times police officers have a tendency to patrol the main drags, the main streets over the actual side streets in their beat area. And when my officers aren't on calls for service, I urge them to be in the community, talk to people. It doesn't cost anything to get out of a patrol car and talk to somebody. And real briefly, there was a term in Arizona on one of the Native American communities where in their native language, it described their police officers as being a head without a body. And I asked, how did this term come about? And one of the community members told me, it's because the only time I see a police officer is when they're driving by in their police car, and all we see is their head. And I urge my police officers, don't be like that community. Don't be the head without a body police officer. Get out and interact and talk to the people.
Very good. Secretary?
Thank you. I just wanted to, again, lots been said, so I'm trying to remember
You got it.
some of the points, so forgive me there. But
No problem.
back to the $100 million, I just want to emphasize just for a moment, it's just not about putting police officers on the street. And I get that that has become the message, but our approach really has three priorities. It's the retention and recruitment of police officers. We want to retain the ones that we have, because obviously we need them out there. And again, we just talked about the violent crime issues and crime in general. So we need to retain the ones we have, because we're not bringing them in at the same rate that we're losing them. So it's retention. It's then the recruitment side. The $100 million will go towards crime reduction strategies as well, and accountability and training, which is what we're talking about. And so it's not just about just adding police officers without, that three-prong approach. The accountability and training side, misconduct is huge. And one of the concerns that we have as law enforcement executives is that if someone has a misconduct report, we always say that correction and disciplinary action should be timely. And if we have a backlog of cases that we're not handling appropriately through the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy Board, that's an issue, right? I mean, we call them gypsy cops, right? Somebody who hurries up and resigns before they're in trouble, and then ends up in another law enforcement agency where they're able to perform poorly again. So this is something we're looking to address with this $100 million as well. So it's not just about putting uniforms out there. I just want to be clear about that. It's about adding resources again to offload a little bit of responsibility off the police officer. It's to look at those strategies directly that we can put out there for violent crime. And then again, the accountability and training side. So I just want to touch on that. As far as something you mentioned about, getting pulled over, and I'm so glad I heard you say about speaking to our youth about the accountability side of things from their perspective. We don't always know why the police officer's pulling us over. And when I look at interactions, sometimes they go sideways. Sometimes the officer very quickly is met with aggression about, why are you stopping me? I know my rights and all those things. And the reality is that you don't really know the information that the police officer received to that point yet, right? Give them an opportunity to get through the call. And if you feel you've been wrong, there's a process and there's a way to make your complaint known through the police department. We have internal affairs and all of those things that'll handle those things. It's not roadside. And if I could encourage anything from our young people, this is not a roadside debate where you want to start arguing about who's right and who's wrong. Because, when a police officer makes that stop and a second car shows up, you don't know the call for service that they responded to yet. So it's really not the time to have that argument. So my advice would be is just be respectful, ask the questions when it's appropriate, work with the police officer. And if he's out of line, we'll deal with it. I'm here to assure you, again, like I mentioned, nothing more frustrating to a police administrator than to have your officer erode the trust that you've been working on so hard. So I would just encourage that's not the time to do it. Just want to kind of just sum that up for you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, and thank you for saying that that's not the time to be aggressive toward an officer when you're pulled over. But again, because of social media, and because these things are not just social media, these are actual events that are happening in our families and in our communities. These are cousins and uncles. We all watched across this nation, George Floyd being killed by a knee. We don't know all the circumstances around what happened before it got to that, because the camera pieces are here and there. But the fear that even me as a grown woman that came over, and the compassion toward that man on the ground, it changes your thoughts toward just a regular pullover. There were times we were pulled over just for a broken brake light, and we had to receive the fact because we knew. But these young people, there is fear, and the only way that today, the respect level of an officer has diminished because of what they see and because of what they've received. And fear is a strong thing. And this is why I mentioned the Black church, the Black community leaders. We are going to request that the police officers get more involved, push themselves into the spaces of trust, because that's where it starts. If you go into the places of trust and then spring out from there, then you begin to gather the community in. But when you go in and you're forceful, all I see is your face and your uniform, and I remember what I saw last. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely agree. We definitely got to get more involved with, the Black churches and also the Black leaders. And the Black leaders got to get more involved because we really don't know who they are, right? And I heard you talk about community. I know you're from Hobbs, so I know they have, Black people in a certain neighborhood, but in Albuquerque, that's just not the case, right? Because the Black neighborhood is no longer Black. It was, infested with drugs. Black people were in out. Even the community center, right? It's not Black. When you go there, the Black kids are not going to see it. So you talk about symbolism that was taken from them, history that was taken from them. And so the only way you're going to be able to reach out to our community is with the Black churches and leaders. So I would definitely agree. And also, whoever our Black leaders are, we need y'all to step up. Now is the time.
Good.
We are tired of the gatekeepers. We are tired of you guys, talking for us and speaking for us, and we don't know who you are. So you guys need to come to the forefront also. And now is the time to step up for these kids, because we have to look at prevention. Because if we don't start now and we don't get these kids now, once they turn 18, that's it. They start shooting, they start committing all kind of crime. And we know that is the statistic from 18 to 24. We got a group of kids who are not even going to school today at La Cueva High School. And so if they're not going to school, they're going to be doing something else. They're either going to be committing crime, they're going to be smoking weed, they're going to be doing something. And so now is the time we need our leaders to stand up. And I think the church would be a good start.
Well, I have to ask, do you know the Black leaders in the state of New Mexico that lead in the communities? I want an honest answer from you. Do you know them?
In Hobbs, I do. And it's, I have an open door with employees, and I have an open door with any community leader, because I'll use Joe Cotton, the local NAACP president in Hobbs. He's got my cell number, and if people come to him with a problem, and if he believes that, hey, I need to talk to the chief, he calls me, and he comes in, and we sit down, and we'll look at body camera footage, we'll look at in-car camera. We might not agree on what took place. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing that the police officer is doing? But the overwhelming majority of things we agree upon, whether they're good or bad. And it always comes with, I don't hide anything, you know, and I don't want to say I jokingly say this, but if we have an ugly baby, we own it in policing. At least that's the way I do it. And I don't try to cover for bad police officers. We you know, we have a lot of police officers, no matter where they work, they want to be the highest paid in the state or wherever they're working. Well, I tell police officers, if you want to be the highest paid in the state, you better be the best police officers in the state as well. Just because you have pay doesn't mean it equates your abilities out on the street. And but with the local leaders, absolutely. I talk to clergy. I talk to somebody. If there's a group of people, and a lot of times just from a distance, you can tell who is the most vocal or who might be in charge. I'll just stop, say hello. Hey, how's it doing? I identify myself. Hey, I'm the chief. And they go, who? You're the chief? And then they might say, we're doing a great job. Or they might say, hey, I have some issues, you know, and they might be quality of life issues. They might be code enforcement issues. They might be something that's in an entirely different city department. I don't immediately shut them down and go, oh, that's someone else. I get the information and I forward it to the correct person. But I let the person know before I leave, hey, this will be, you know, an engineering department problem or a traffic problem, but they will be in contact with you. And, but I don't know, I'm not sure that that's going on everywhere in the state or everywhere in the country. We do know that there's areas that are in need of improvement.
Thank you. Secretary?
No, I appreciate that. You know, while I'm still learning my job at the state, obviously, there's a lot of different communities throughout New Mexico, and I certainly have not had the chance to interact with every one of them. I can go back to my previous experience again, the last 27 years with the city of Rio Rancho, and the same thing applies. We're very much in tune with our community leaders for that particular community. That said, we never really made a distinction between one community leader or another. And I know here the question specifically is are we connecting with Black leaders in the community? And in the city of Rio Rancho, a pretty diverse community in and of itself. Again, we didn't necessarily make that distinction. Our door was open to all. And, you know, if there was a community function, we do our best to be there either personally as leadership, or we would make sure that our officers were there. And then we would also schedule community events from the police side and make sure that anyone was welcome. So, and I think that's important. You know, as we're having this discussion, we're having a lot of discussion just on one ethnicity alone. And I always fear that, again, being Black myself, that I don't want to necessarily single out anyone else from those opportunities to engage with our police department. Because when you're looking to build trust within the community, it's really across, you know, we need to be diverse. It's everyone. And when we're looking at drawing people into our police force, we accept anyone who believes in what we believe and who's willing to help the overall mission, which is keeping our community safe. So I just think it's important to also recognize that as you reach out within the community, it really just kind of depends on where you're from, what demographic do you have within your community? And for the city of Rio Rancho, we did not exclude anyone from those opportunities.
Very good. We are still receiving questions as you place them in the chat. And I wanted to say, we're thankful that the Office of African American Affairs has brought this conversation together, because this is a very diverse community. Even being a pastor of a church where my church is very diverse, all different communities represented, but the experiences are different. And so I agree with you. The Black leaders in the community must step forth to help remove the fear of the two coming together. There has to be someone to step forth, and we're calling you forth today. We're thankful today for everyone, especially this Black mother that was very articulate in explaining what you want and what we need in our community. Again, thank you, Stacy Burleson, for being with us today, and our newly appointed Secretary of Defense. I'm sorry, that's a big one right there, huh?
Department of Public Safety, but.
Department of Public Safety, you know, maybe I am very prophetic. Maybe I'm calling it out, but I'm sorry. We're thankful, and we're glad to see you in that office, and we expect to see more of you. And thank you, Chief Ortolano, for coming all the way from Hobbs, New Mexico, to be a part of this very important conversation. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Pastor Gian Ralph here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Healing Waters Ministries, and I want to see this conversation continue. I want to see things happen. I want to see the children respect and reverence the police department, because this is a safety unit that is even spoken of in the Bible, that we must follow those that are of the law. And we will come together. And I do believe that this is the beginning of something great. Thank you very much. Thank you.